In August of 1305, William Wallace met a death as brutal as it was unforgettable, dragged through the streets, hanged, butchered, and torn apart before the eyes of a jeering crowd. His enemies believed that by destroying his body, they could erase his cause. But they were wrong. What followed after his execution would shake both Scotland and England, shaping the wars of independence for years to come. Wallace was gone, but his shadow loomed larger than ever. This is the untold aftermath of William Wallace's execution. If you want to uncover more stories of brutal history and the legends they left behind, make sure to subscribe so you never miss the next one. Before the execution came the trial. In August 1305, Wallace was brought before a court in Westminster Hall. There was no jury and no chance of defense. He was charged with treason against the English crown, as well as with acts of murder and arson during the wars in Scotland. Wallace refused to acknowledge the charge of treason. He argued that he had never sworn loyalty to Edward I and therefore could not betray him. To Wallace, he was a soldier fighting for his country's independence, not a traitor to England. But his words carried no weight. The verdict had been decided long before he entered the hall. The trial was less about justice than about spectacle. By condemning Wallace publicly, Edward wanted to strip him of honor and portray him as a criminal rather than a freedom fighter. Yet even in silence, Wallace's refusal to bend gave his supporters another reason to see him not as a traitor, but as a patriot who stood defiant to the very end. On the morning of August 23rd, 1305, London turned into a stage. William Wallace was dragged from the Tower across the city, bound in chains and pulled behind horses. The long procession was deliberate humiliation, forcing him to endure the mockery of the crowd before facing his end at Smithfield. There, the sentence was carried out in full. Wallace was hanged, but cut down before death could claim him. Gasping for air, he was pinned to the block as the executioner cut open his body. His entrails were pulled out and burned before his eyes, his heart wrenched from his chest while he still lived. Finally, with his strength spent and his suffering complete, the axe fell. The man who had defied Edward I longer than any other was struck down in the most brutal fashion the law allowed. For King Edward I, Wallace's execution was more than punishment. It was theatre. Every stage of his torment was designed not just to kill him, but to send a message that would echo across the kingdom. This was not justice, it was propaganda. By making a spectacle of Wallace's suffering, Edward sought to strip him of honor and brand him forever as a criminal, not a patriot. It was a warning carved into flesh. Defiance would be met with agony and rebellion with humiliation. And Edward made certain that Wallace's fate would not remain in London alone. It would be carried north into the very heart of Scotland. After Wallace's brutal execution, the sentence was carried out in full. His head was dipped in tar and placed on a spike above London Bridge, where every traveller could see the fate of a rebel. His body was cut into 4 parts and distributed across Britain as a warning. Contemporary chronicles differ on the exact locations, but most accounts mention Newcastle, Berwick, Stirling, and either Perth or York. These towns were not chosen at random. They were places where English authority was contested or where resistance to Edward I had been strongest. By displaying Wallace's remains there, the king hoped to smother rebellion before it could flare again. To his enemies, these grisly trophies signaled conquest. To his countrymen, they became bitter reminders of both Wallace's fall and England's cruelty. Far from erasing him, the scattering of his body ensured that William Wallace's presence was felt in many corners of the realm. When news of Wallace's execution reached Scotland, it spread like wildfire. Villagers whispered the details with horror, how their hero had been dragged through London, mutilated, and displayed like a common criminal. For some, fear set in. If the English king could do this to William Wallace, what chance did anyone else have? But for others, his death had the opposite effect. Wallace's torment did not silence his cause, it turned him into a martyr. Around firesides and in secret gatherings, his story was retold, not as a tale of defeat, but of defiance. Parents spoke his name to their children, not with pity, but with pride. Songs and poems began to circulate, carried by bards who turned his suffering into legend. The English had hoped to destroy Wallace's legacy. Instead, they gave it fuel. Scotland's spirit of resistance did not die with him, it only hardened. In the years after Wallace's death, Scotland seemed leaderless. The rebellion he had ignited flickered, threatened to die out under English pressure. But Wallace's execution did something Edward never intended. It cleared the path for another figure to rise. Robert the Bruce had once been a rival, even at times hesitant to throw his full weight behind Wallace's cause. But now, with Wallace gone, Bruce carried the banner of freedom. Where Wallace's fight had ended on the scaffold, Bruce's would continue on the battlefield. Wallace's death gave Bruce something no strategy ever could, a martyr to point to, a legend to invoke. When he rallied men to his side, he could remind them of Wallace's agony and promise that Scotland's struggle would not be in vain. At Bannockburn in 1314, nearly a decade after Wallace's brutal end, Bruce would deliver the victory his fallen countrymen never lived to see. And though their names belonged to different chapters of the same war, in the minds of the Scots, the two were forever bound. Wallace, the martyr, and Bruce, the king who fulfilled his cause. Ballads and chronicles began to blur fact and fiction. Wallace was no longer just a man, he was a symbol, larger than life. Tales claimed he fought single-handedly against impossible odds, that he never wavered, that his spirit continued to haunt the English long after his death. Centuries later, writers like Blind Harry took these fragments and built them into epics, reshaping Wallace into the very image of Scotland's struggle for freedom. By the time of the Renaissance, his name was spoken not with fear, but with reverence. And in the modern age, popular culture, most famously the film Braveheart, brought Wallace's story to audiences around the world. Though historians point out the inaccuracies, the power of the myth is undeniable. Wallace's agony, once meant as a warning, became an immortal tale of resistance. Centuries after his death, William Wallace remains central to Scotland's identity. His name is carved into monuments like the Wallace Monument at Stirling, remembered in ballads and retold through chronicles and films. To each generation, he is something different, warrior, martyr, rebel, but always a symbol of defiance against tyranny. William Wallace's death was meant to end his cause, yet it became the spark that kept Scotland's fight for freedom alive.